Okay, let's review the pelvis. What we have here is a pelvic girdle made up of two hemipelvises, or os coxa, and a sacrum in between, making a whole round structure. That will be the pelvic girdle. What we have here is one os coxa, one half of the pelvis. The pelvis is one of the bones that comes in two versions, a male version and a female version. Got both of them right here. We got a male version that's narrower on top and a female version that's wider on top to support the baby when the woman is pregnant. One way we can differentiate the female from the male pelvis is by looking at the top, seeing the width of it, but we can also look at the pubic angle, which is right down in here. A pubic angle that is greater than 100 degrees indicates a female pelvis. A pubic angle that's lesser than 90 degrees indicates a male pelvis. When we turn the pelvises around, for the radiologist, this angle here makes it look like a champagne glass, and this angle here makes it look like a martini glass. And so they often call the female pelvis looking like the angle, pubic angle looks like a martini glass versus a champagne glass in the male pelvis. When we look at the pelvis, we look at a structure that is made up of three different bones that are fused together that create one. We have an ilium, we have an ischium, and we have a pubis. An easy way to differentiate those different bones is by looking at the acetabulum, the round structure that will house the hip joint. And we separate it into a superior half and an inferior half. The superior half is going to be the ilium, and the inferior half we can then separate again into two. The posterior portion will make up the ischium, the anterior portion will make up the pubis. When we hold the pelvis, this piece is the ilium, the sit bone area is the ischium, and the front is the pubis. We're looking at an ilium now. The first structure I want to point to is the iliac crest. That's the uppermost portion. On our own selves, that's where we can put our hands on and rest on the bone. Often we have the baby sitting on that portion. That's the iliac crest. When we move, we take the iliac crest and we move posterior. The first bone area is called the posterior superior iliac spine. And we go even further inferior. We have the posterior inferior iliac spine, PSIS and PIIS. And then we have a indentation that's pretty large, and that is known as the greater sciatic notch. We move further inferior, and now we actually go into the ischial part of the os coxa. That's the ischial spine. And the next notch is going to be the lesser sciatic notch. Let's back up into the ilium, because now we're going to move and take the iliac crest and go forward, anterior. We have a pointy part, the most front part on our crest, and that is the anterior superior iliac spine, ASIS. And then we actually have a little indentation, that is the superior iliac notch. And the second little bump will be the anterior inferior iliac spine, or AIIS. We look at the ischium, the sit bone area. We have a couple of structures that we want to point out to. We start with the ischial spine, lesser sciatic notch, the ischial tuberosity, and then the ischial ramus. The ischial ramus will continue as a ramus, but it becomes the pubic ramus. Right in here is a roughened area, that's where the ischium and the pubis fuse together, and this portion will be the inferior pubic ramus. And this portion of the pubic bone will be the superior pubic ramus, last piece left on the pubis will be the pubic symphysis, which is right here. The pubic symphysis holds a fibrocartilaginous pad in it, such as an intervertebral disc. The rami combined will make a hole, and that's known as the obturator foramen. We look on the outside portion of the whole os coxa, lateral portion. The biggest structure we can see is the acetabulum. The acetabulum has a rounded surface that looks like a little bit of like a half-moon shape area, and that's called the lunate surface. And that lunate surface will also have a it will also have a pad on top of it, and then the head of the femur will sit very nicely in it like this. Further up here, we have what sometimes is known as the external iliac fossa as a whole structure, but we have gluteal lines. We have gluteal line right here, we have gluteal line right here. The gluteal lines is where gluteus muscles are attached, especially medius and minimus. And when we look at the internal pelvic area, we have the internal iliac fossa, or sometimes some textbooks just call that the iliac fossa itself. We have a line here that's known as the arcuate line. It's kind of a hill, a crest area. It's the arcuate line. And then we want to look at that half of the pelvis, the semi-pelvis, because the other structure that we can see here is the auricular surface. And that's where the ilium will connect with the sacrum and make the sacroiliac joint. We have two sacroiliac joints on both sides of the sacrum, and then we have pubic symphysis in the front, making us have three joints that connect the pelvic girdle together. Let's look now at a femur, the proximal femur at this point. This here is the anterior surface of a femur. The way we can tell anterior from posterior on the femur is by the smooth surface here in the anterior side, where the patella will be, the patella surface, compared to the two bumps, which are the two condyles in the posterior end. So this is the femur at the anterior end. On top here we have a round structure. Usually the round structures are called head. So this is the head of the femur. This here, the slender portion, is the neck of the femur. When we go further down, we have a big bump on the outside, exterior, and that is, or lateral, and that is the greater trochanter. And then a little bit more in the posterior medial end, we have a smaller projection, and that is the lesser trochanter. So the head, the neck, greater trochanter, lesser trochanter. In the posterior, from the posterior side, between the two trochanters, we have what's known as the Intertrochanteric Crest. It's a little bit of a hill to climb over. In the front, anteriorly, we also have a connection between the greater and the lesser trochanter, and that is known as the Intertrochanteric line, because it is not as rigid. In the back, posteriorly, we have this roughened ridge here, and that is called the linea aspera. And as we go up proximally, that linea aspera splits and makes like a Y-looking structure. The one line that goes towards the greater trochanter is known as the gluteal tuberosity, and the one that goes towards the lesser trochanter is known as the pectineal line.